right. So we had a couple questions before. So the stuff, the ADHD stuff that's asynchronous that I told you is not due till 16th. It's still not due, but you're going to want to review the notes. Of course, you'll have your books for your midterm. There's a question or two about it on the midterm, but you should be fine with the materials that you'll have with your notes and stuff. And the notes that I put up there, you should be good. So today,
Sorry, I have a question. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, you're good.
So is the midterm on Lockdown Browser? Like, will we be able to access the textbook if it's online?
Yeah, so we did take it off the Lockdown Browser, so you will be able to access your textbook online and you can use your notes.
Okay.
We'll do that for the midterm, but for the final, you won't be able to use your book.
Okay.
But for this one, you can. So we did, Mr. Hurley took it off the Lockdown Browser, so you will be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let's talk. Any other questions? We're going to go over a little bit about the midterm before we end class tonight. All right, so let's talk about students with emotional behavioral disorders. So we'll talk about the definition, some characteristics, some causes, the prevalence, and then educational considerations. And then we will do a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about the midterm before we set you free tonight. So when we look at what you often will hear as ED, so there's lots of terminology and different terms that you'll hear people call it. So one is emotionally disturbed. And of course, that's the official disability from IDEA. You also may hear behaviorally disordered. A lot of professionals will talk about that. And if you're a member or you hear about the Council for Exceptional Children, they also call it behaviorally disordered. You'll hear emotional or behavior disorder. That's often referred to by mental health counselors, things like that. And then you'll hear about this stuff called prosocial behaviors. So those are desirable ways of behaviors. Working in a group, getting together, being kind, donating, things like that. Those are all prosocial behaviors. So in the Zoom chat, think about 2 prosocial behaviors that you would need or you need to succeed there in the university environment. Working in a group, being kind to peers, absolutely. Collaboration, understanding, being able to communicate with professors. Empathy. Collaboration is huge, right? That's huge in college. Communication is good. Oh, Ty, I like that. Being able to be criticized. Yeah, some professors can be really mean, can't they? Not mean, just it's constructive criticism is what we like to call it. Yeah, that's good, guys. You definitely got it. So when you think about it, those are skills that a lot of you probably already naturally had, right? You were taught them, you learned them, but a lot of our kids with emotional disabilities don't have those skills. So those are things that we'll have to teach them, or you may have to teach them. But some of the problems with the definition are really that there's a lack of really precise definitions for mental health and normal behavior. So what's normal? Normal's different for everybody, right? There's differences among the models. There's a really imprecise measurement of emotion and behavior. A lot of it's very subjective. It's rating scales done by parents, by staff. They often overlap with other disabilities, kind of like when we talked about our SLD kids. You know, if they struggle and they're frustrated with their work, sometimes we'll see. What's that, Ty?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not know my microphone.
Oh, you're okay. As long as you're okay. And then there's really differences in the professionals who diagnose and serve the children and youth, right? Again, it's very subjective in terms of what the behavior is my definition of a very difficult behavior may not be your definition, right? I've been doing this a long time. Mr. Hurley's definition of a difficult behavior may not be my definition because we look at it from two different lenses. But really what people do agree on is that the behavior is extreme. So we've got really extreme behaviors. It's a chronic problem. And it really is unacceptable because of social or cultural expectations or even school expectations. I'm a student that likes to throw herself on the floor. We had one recently who, she had some talent. She has some talent and would get mad. And when she didn't get away, she would pee on everybody. So, that's obviously a behavior that's not normal and really unacceptable in a classroom or a school environment. But when we look at the federal definition, emotionally disturbed includes that inability to learn, and it's not due to any intellectual, any sensory, or any health factors, right? It's that inability to maintain those satisfactory relationships. There's inappropriate behavior or feelings. There's usually a pervasive mood of depression or unhappiness, and sometimes there are physical symptoms of fears. So some of the things that are included are, I think we talked a little bit about this, schizophrenia. It does exclude socially maladjusted. So those are kids who just really had the experience. Some states that interpret that as conduct disorder. So we do have students who have a profile display as a conduct disorder, or what I like to call just BAD. And that does not have them fall under that federal definition of emotionally disabled, right? Those are truly your kids who just behavior and do what they want to do when they want to do it. It doesn't matter what anybody says. Really, there are a lot of influences on behavior if you think about it, right? One is your environment. So think about environment as you guys are in schools or settings. Where are these children growing up? What is their home life like? What was their parents' home life like? How did they grow up? Their social and cultural values, the climate of the community, where are they growing up? What type of community do they live in? There's individual characteristics of the individual. And then, of course, influences our management style. So how is their behavior handled? How is it addressed in school? So think about the effects of cultural norms, right? So interactions between students and teachers, discipline decisions, some of the school-family relationships, and then identifying students for additional services. You think about some of those interactions between students and teachers for a minute, right? There are sometimes I go in classrooms and I can see that the teacher is just like done. They've had enough. Johnny has just picked that last nerve. And you can really see where the teachers get frustrated, which is understandable, but they have to stay, and you'll have to stay in control of your own behaviors. So one thing important to remember is that you can't control the behavior of somebody else. You really can't. You can't force somebody to do something. You can't control their behavior. The only thing you can do is control how you react and handle that behavior. So you always want to stay calm, cool, and collective. So here's a little bit more about the norms. So you think about like personal space. So in the US, we typically stand about 18 inches away from each other with who we're talking. Usually you think about that like an arm's length or a leg's length away from each other. But if you think about other cultures, in Latino and Indian cultures, they stand much closer to each other. So it may not be that that child is being is purposely showing a behavior. It's just his culture. So these are really things we have to think about as we're looking at behavior and trying to analyze what's kind of happening. So in the US, we like eye contact, right? We like to look at someone's eyes. We like to look at somebody's face. But Middle and Eastern and Israel cultures, they give more direct eye contact than we like. They stare, and that's okay. That's just their culture. So what sometimes we may appear as rude and disrespectful is really you have to think about the culture the child is coming from. We give speeches and lectures in a modulated neutral tone, right? We use our inside voice, not our outside voice. Whereas Latino and African American cultures prefer more enthusiasm and energy. A lot of the times I've seen this if I've gone to different churches, right? Different cultures, different community churches, you can see it, you get a much different experience in some of those. In the US, we don't like self-disclosure. We keep things kind of on a less personal level. And that often makes us, individuals who have a Mexican background, they might see us as cold and unfriendly. The Taiwanese see us as unfriendly, warm, and expressive. So kind of keeping to ourselves at times and things can appear to be rude to other people. We are very informal at times in our approach to others. We have free speech, we have candor. If you've ever met anybody who is from Germany, they are very proper and formal. And it comes across as, again, rude or that we're being disrespectful. Here are some more examples. I'm not going to read through these, but you can see you've got some formal versus informal in different areas. So kind of just really thinking about when you're looking at behavior, how that's different across the different cultures, and how that can be interpreted. And that's why we really have to be careful in schools about how we're handling and dealing with behavior. So really, those norms in schools, we're going to look at those interactions between the students and the teachers, the discipline decisions, what are their school family relationships, and again, like we talked, what are additional services we can provide for that student. So how do we define normal behavior? Is it just a setting on a washing machine? I mean, do you guys have any idea what is normal? So Hurley, you have any idea what normal is anymore?
No, it's different. My opinion, my background of that, normal looks different to everyone. It's different.
Yeah, you guys, it fits the average, typical to what we socially would feel is acceptable. And you're right, Riley, normal looks different for everyone, right? Normal, like Mr. Hurley said, normal in his classroom would be very different than if you were in a third grade classroom. But to Mr. Hurley and his folks, it's like, oh, no big deal. If it was in another classroom, it'd be like, whoa, what do we do? Right? So normal is different for everybody and in different settings, right? It's not just that setting on the washing machine that's normal. There's a lot of different definitions for what normal actually is. And sometimes I think I'm normal, and then I'm like, no, I'm really not so normal. But that's okay. Embrace it. So if you feel like you're not normal, embrace it. Everybody's unique. I love it. So let's look at a difference between, there's two different labels. So you have your emotional disturbance. So this is that government term, right? That's what we use to identify our students as eligible for special education services. But then you have emotional and behavioral disorder. So this really is a mental health term. It's used by researchers, educators, and other professionals, and it's a range of disorders, right? So in our 13 disability categories, it's emotional disturbance, but you also may hear people say emotional or behavioral disorder when you look kind of more at that mental health term. If you guys haven't heard of the DSM manual, this is a big old manual that's out there for all the different, disabilities, ailments, anything you can think of. In terms of what it's called in that mental health world, and emotional behavioral disorder is in there. And in our special ed world, it's called ED. Your psychologist, when you get in school, should have a DSM manual, things like that. But here's the $1 million question. Do you think you can have emotional behavioral disorder, but not considered emotionally disabled according to the criteria for eligibility? What do y'all think? Tell us a yes or no in the chat. I think they all got it, Mr. Hurley. Absolutely, you can, 100%. So you can easily have an emotional behavioral disorder through mental health, things like that, but not considered ED by the standards and the regulations for those categories. So let's talk about some myths. So we just said this. Yes, a student can have emotional behavior disorder, but not be considered, not meet the eligibility process. This gets very frustrating for parents when they come in and the doctor has a prescription that says, you know, Johnny needs an evaluation and he has a medical diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and attachment disorder and all those things. I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a student at one of my schools that we actually evaluated 3 times, 3 years in a row, 3 different times, because mom had a medical diagnosis and they were convinced that that child should receive an IEP. However, the child is doing great in school. I mean, he's gifted and talented. His biggest issue, the teachers were saying, that is he talks too much. I wish that was the only issue for some of our kids, right? That they talk too much. So there's an example, and it can be very frustrating in schools, especially for principals and teachers, when they are dealing with some of these behaviors related to it, and they just don't qualify, even if they have a medical outside diagnosis of that emotional behavioral disorder. It can be very, very frustrating. So here's a myth. EBD is the same as ED. Not true. Biological, family, school, and cultural factors are interrelated, right? It's like this big circle of how we call it the circle of life, like the Lion King, right? Everything comes together. So all of this is interrelated and of course influences a child's behavior. So Michael received so here's that first person language, right? We don't say it's, you know, Michael has an emotional disability, right? We say Michael received special education services under the category of emotional disturbance. We don't say, oh, that's an ED kid. Because remember, they're children first, they're adults first, right? They're not a disability first. So keep in mind, remember that first person language we talked about, I think the first class. So let's talk about how frequent is this? How often do we see this? So it can be calculated at a given point of time, right? So anytime you're in a district or whatever, you can, I mean, if somebody asks me, hey, how many ED students are in Anderson 4, I can pull up a report and I can tell you. So it's all about how many students meet that criteria, right? And then the prevalence of a disorder over a period of time. It's usually over the lifetime of a school. So how many students, we might look at how many students with ED that I've had over the last 4 years. How many met the qualification for emotional behavioral disorder? We have documentation at any point in their life. I think any of us can have that at some point if we've had some sort of life-changing event, right? Think about COVID. If you've lost significant others, if people have gotten really sick, if you're in a car accident, if a family member is in a car accident, right? All of that is going to impact your behavior. So at some point, every one of us can have EBD, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're emotionally disabled. Does that make sense? Give me like a thumbs up and head nod. And okay, something. Yes, okay, good. So approximately 12% of our school age youth, now this is a little bit old, it's from 2012, but exhibited mild manifestations of emotional behavioral disability. What are some of the behaviors you might see? What do you think you'd see with a student who was emotionally behaviorally disordered? If you want to unmute your mic, you can. Tell us just give us some, you could see some physical violence, outbursts and withdrawal, not getting along with others, lack of self-control, tantrums. Depending on the age, you absolutely could see tantrums. We could see that lack of attentiveness. Have you guys seen some of this in any of your, this is where I'd love for you to mute and tell us a little story time of what you've seen or had in some of the classrooms you've observed, or if you're in a classroom a little more frequently now. What are some of the things you guys have seen? community. I mean, there are definitely things you can see out in a community. Okay, Lindsay, you see this all the time. Tell us.
Okay, I work in after school care with kindergartners and first graders, and I actually have a similar experience to what you're saying about your kid, that when he doesn't get his way or she doesn't get her way, she pees. And we have a child that we've heard like comes from kind of a rough family background, and when he doesn't get his way, he'll like threaten that he's gonna pee himself or like pee on the ground to get something to go his way.
So how do you guys handle that? What do you do?
Luckily it's gotten a lot better because we've kind of realized like stuff that will like trigger him or set him off. But honestly, there wasn't much we could do because we are just like after school care. I'm sorry, there's motorcycles outside around me if you hear that. But
Right.
that we don't have like any obviously kind of like behavior plans because we're after school care and we're like not in the classroom. So we've just like tried to find things that like prevent like those things that like trigger him.
The best thing to do is not react, right? Just matter of fact. Yeah. Because I think a lot of times they're looking for reaction. So our little girl, when the first time she said that, I have a behavior specialist who I really wanted to join class tonight. So we have a behavior specialist we hired in Anderson for, but she is working on a degree and started her own classes tonight. And I was like, oh, Brantley, this would have been perfect for you to be at tonight. But she said it to her and she was like, all right, well, if you do that, you're gonna have to clean it up.
Exactly.
And like it stopped. Like that was the end of it. She's like, I don't want to clean it up. So let's see, we got another one.
In my middle school, I would help in the special ed classroom, and there was one student who, whenever it would be time to go home, he would always want his parents to pick him up instead of ride the bus. And so whenever it would be time to try to get on the bus, he would actually start biting people. And so they would always prematurely dismiss everyone else. So then all the students were out of the room. So there was no physical harm available to them. And they would just have like one pair or someone in the room. And I shadowed one day. And so I was in there, but I like stayed back. And what they would do is they would just be like, well, your parents aren't coming. So like, you'll just have to sleep here and like wait, because like he would get on the bus. Like he just wanted to like know his parents like really weren't coming, but like that was his way. For some reason, biting was his way of trying to get his parents to come get him, which like didn't really correlate.
Yeah, he might have figured, well, if I bite somebody and hurt somebody, they're going to call my mom or dad, and mom or dad is going to come pick me up. So that could be somewhat of a learned behavior if that's what's happened in the past for him.
The first couple times before they figured out the pattern, they said like the parents would come because that was like an incident report, whatever, like, but then they were like, oh, like this is his way of getting his parents.
Yeah, so he learned quickly, right? Very smart. He learned quickly that this is the way to get mom and dad to come, is if I bite. And then, you know, he learned hopefully that, no, this isn't really going to work. So that's one of the things that principals and teachers and administrators struggle with in schools is, when do we get to the point that we do send children home or we do call mom and dad? Because our children do learn very quickly. Even our students with a lower IQ learn very quickly how to make it work for them, right? They learn how to, well, if I do this, you know, if I pee on the floor, you know, maybe they'll call my mom. Well, that's not happening. I mean, in this situation, they ended up putting her back in pull-ups because it was constant. And we were like, okay, we're not doing this. So that's seems to have stopped it. But now I got a first grader sitting in pull-ups, so I got to figure out how to take the pull-ups away without this reoccurring. But they will figure out how to go. So always calling mom and dad is not the answer. Would you agree, Mr. Hurley?
100%.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And y'all, it is the behaviors we're seeing. This is why I wanted my behavior specialist to join, but the behaviors we're seeing in schools now, and you guys have seen, are just, it's like I've never seen before. I mean, just little ones and all sorts of things going on. A lot of it, to me, what's going on is a lot of more mental health issues. So students more with the behavioral disorder as opposed to emotionally disturbed. A lot of those conduct disorder children, there's been trauma in the home. There's, with this one student that's doing what she's doing, we learned that there is domestic violence and dad does hit mom and all of those things. So now we know the reason for the behavior. But what's frustrating is we can't fix that. I mean, we can call DSS, we can make calls, we can do all that, but in a school, you can't fix that. So we've had to come up with ways to work with it in the school. Like we said, at some point in life, either prior to, currently, or may develop, 25% of folks may develop some sort of emotional behavioral disorder or issue, right? Because of things that have happened, domestic abuse, like we talked about, if there's tragedy in your family or in life. But less than 1%, and this sounds surprising, of the school-age population are actually served in special ed under the ED label. It is really, you think about it, behavior, you're like, oh, it's gotta be, they've gotta be ED. No, it is, first of all, it's very hard and difficult to qualify for emotional disability in a school setting. And I know in my district, we are very careful about students who receive that label because that's a big label. It's almost as big as a label of autism, which Mr. Hurley is going to talk about here in 2 weeks. But it is a big label. I take issue when we're talking about 5 and 6 year olds and schools are like, oh, well, they're emotionally disturbed. Whoa, you're telling me a 5 or 6 year old is? Right. So we have very few in school districts that actually are served under that label. Most of them are served under ADHD or other health impairment, things like that. Most common in school, we do see ADHD, we see those conduct disorder, we see those oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. Again, sometimes what I call those are just your BAD kids, right? Those are kids who just haven't had the upbringing, haven't had the a good model for behavior. Maybe they were neglected or nobody really paid attention to them or things like that, or they were just left to do their own thing. One of the things that frustrates me is when parents say, well, we don't have any problems at home, so this is all your problem in school. It's like there is always something, right? Behavior is always communicated. It's a form of communication. The children are communicating something with their behavior. So here's just a little more example of some of the statistics. So 20 students in first grade, only 9%. So that's approximately only 1 or 2 students. So it's a very low percentage of students who are actually identified as a student with emotional disability. There's a lot of factors that influence that. Family, school, biological, cultural, all the things that we've kind of talked about tonight, all of those things, you think about your upbringing, right? It all impacts who you are and how you behave. I mean, I think about how some of these little kids talk to teachers and stuff, and I thought, man, if I ever did that, I'd have gone home and my mom probably would have beat me, right? I'd have been in so much trouble. But I just feel like there's such a lack of respect sometimes that we see all the time. And it's very frustrating. But my daughter will tell you the only thing I ever had to do was say her middle name and she knew. Like if I said her middle name, that's it, she was done. So when we look at family, right, we're going to look at those structures, those interactions, their discipline, what's happening in the home, how are the children disciplined, abuse, things like that. Mobility, do they move around a lot? Are they in different schools all the time? Are they very transient? How are they disciplined at home? Are they? I've had situations where parents have said, well, we don't discipline at home, and you have empathy. I think of one in particular where the mom unfortunately kept having miscarriages. And then this little boy was their rainbow child or their miracle child. So he got to do whatever he wanted at home. And because they didn't want to discipline him because he was the miracle baby. And when you get into a classroom setting, well, you can't run around and tell people to shut up all the time and do whatever you want. That's not how it works. So that's a huge issue. Of course, if there's abuse in the home, things like that, that's huge. I really am going to add like video games and all of those things that our kids play and interact with now definitely can impact their behavior. We also at schools, quite honestly, y'all, we can cause some behaviors, right? If we have poor instruction, if there's poor modeling, if there's inconsistent management, the one thing with behavior, we might have said this in a previous class, is to be consistent, right? You have to handle behavior the same way. Even on a good day or a bad day, you still have to handle it the same way. Students who may be failing, again, that might be going along with an SLD issue, other things, but they're just frustrated and their behavior is just, it's off the chain. If they're living, we have a group home in Anderson 4, and those students often have behavioral difficulties, but these are kids, again, you go into family and background, they don't have anybody, especially, I know for me, I see behavior ramp up, increase before the holidays. That's a huge time. We usually see a big increase in behavior in schools before the holidays. Anytime over long periods of break, summer break, winter break, things like that. Sometimes we even see it on the weekend. If they're with mom one weekend, dad the next weekend, that type of thing. But a lot of it may be because these kids don't want to go home, right? So school is their safe place. So they don't want to go home. So they're going to act up. So this time of year coming up, November and especially December, are usually the highest discipline months for schools, at least in my experience. But you could also have some biological factors, right? Genetics. Does dad have behavior problems? Did mom have behavior problems? Was mom in an alternative school? Things like that. Malnutrition, that's huge. If you don't get fed properly, if you're not taken care of, that's huge. They could have allergies or health issues or just basic temperament. So all of those things can impact behavior as well. And then of course, cultural, right? Media, social media, what's happening on social media? What about peer groups, neighborhoods? Where are these kids living? Where are they growing up? Ethnicity, socioeconomic status. Are they from families of poverty? And honestly, I think we see more behavior out of families who are what we call working class, or maybe even a little more fluent at times, more than we necessarily see it from kids of poverty. Because I think students of poverty a lot of times are so thankful for what they have that they don't often misbehave because they like school. Because it's their safe place, there's rules, there's discipline, there's meals, there's food, there's running water, there's heat, there's AC, all these things that they may not have at home. So they behave in school because they're very happy. So let's talk about this for a minute. So how can we as school professionals be aware of those factors, family, school, cultural, biological, that the student carries, and we'll call it his or her backpack, right? So how can we make ourselves aware of some of these things? Or how can you as future teachers make yourself aware of some of these things? Because this is baggage or backpack that students come with. So how do you learn about these things in your students? Yes, y'all, I am using a Gamecock mug, sorry. Communication, create relationships, get to know, communicate with those parents, right? It all goes back to what we did a few weeks ago about communication and setting off on that right foot and that constant communication. If you have concerns, you may have social workers or guidance counselors and things in your schools that can also help. But it's important to know what's happening and how it's influencing so you can have a better understanding and then work through with the child and how to best address the behavior. So there's internalizing behavior and externalizing behavior. What do you think some internalizing is? Oops. We're internalizing the behavior. What might that look like in a child? And you can unmute or chat. Oh, Mr. Hurley, you're muted.
I'm just reading off the
Oh,
comments. There's a good low confidence, shy, poor self-esteem, shutting down.
yeah, you might see this might be a student in the
Not
classroom who's got their head down, kind of keeps to themselves, doesn't really interact, those type of things. What about externalizing? I mean, this picture pretty much gives a good one.
Yelling,
Yelling,
acting
acting
out.
out. Tantrums, they're great. Tantrums are great in the middle of a classroom or in the middle of a cafeteria. They're even better there.
Oh yeah.
They're fun. Yeah, absolutely. So major categories associated with ED. So you might have ADHD. We talked about ODD, conduct disorder, anxiety disorders. I've seen a lot more anxiety. And doctors writing notes for kids and parents requesting medical homebound because of anxiety and stress. And it really ramped up the year after COVID. Every time I turned around, there was somebody asking for a medical homebound because of anxiety, right? And that's fear. That's legitimate fear based on what happened. It seems to have slowed down a little bit. But depression, schizophrenia, all of those things. Typically, mostly males. I mean, you guys are just getting a bad rap, boys. I'm sorry. But it is typically mostly males who are identified as a student with an emotional disability. There is, unfortunately, a higher percentage of African Americans, and then mostly living in poverty. So even though I may see something different in Anderson 4, statistics are that most of the time it is males, they're African American, and they are students of low socioeconomic status that are often labeled as an individual with an emotional disability. This is something also the state monitors districts for too. A little more, so 22% of elementary students and 38% of secondary students had been held back in their career. They have the worst graduation rate than any other student with a disability. Only about 40% of those students, even though it's a low percentage, but only about 40% of them actually graduate from high school. Typically, these students drop out. The national average is 76%. They do tend to have lower grades and fail more classes. And there is, of course, the high level of suspension and expulsion for students receiving services for an emotional disability. So you can see kind of that pattern, right? They almost become their self-fulfilling prophecy. And y'all, it is really hard when you have a student with an emotional disability to motivate the unmotivated, so to speak. They're a very challenging group of students, and it is very hard to motivate them, especially when they get to high school and they're at that age. And you can't motivate them to do if they don't want. They don't want stickers and lollipops and things like that. So it is really hard to motivate them because they don't really get the impact of, if I don't get a high school diploma, what's that going to mean? Especially if they don't have a good role model at home, if they don't have parents who have jobs or things like that, they're living off of, WIC and food stamps and all that. They see that and like, well, we do fine. Why should I do better? It's very challenging, those students. They're twice as likely to become teenage mothers. I have this year seen more of that. I think I have 3 students at the high school right now who are pregnant. One of them is 15 years old. 15 years old and about to have a baby. I mean, it's a baby having a baby. There are higher rates of unemployment, negative employment experiences. Students with emotional disability often can't hold jobs. They may relate to, substance abuse. There's definitely a need for mental health services. 20% of those students with ED were arrested within the first year of high school, the first year of leaving high school. Oops. Oh. 10% were in some sort of rehab. And then they are twice as likely as other students. Man, y'all, the struggle is real today. I am sorry. Twice as likely to be living in a correctional facility, a halfway house, a drug treatment center, things like that. We have things called, if you've heard of DJJ, we have a lot of students that end up in Department of Juvenile Justice, things like that, in prison. And here's an interesting tidbit. If we have a student in prison, let's say a high school student in prison, the school district is still obligated to teach that child. So we have to have teachers that will go to a prison to teach the children or the teens or whoever who are in jail. Crazy, isn't it? But we do. If they're of age and they're still in schools, and they end up in jail. Now, if they end up with the Department of Juvenile Justice, they have services themselves, but let's say they end up in a totally different prison, then we have to provide services for those those folks who are in prison. So some characteristics, right? Let's talk about developmental, academic, and some social. So students with emotional disability, they often exhibit moderate to severe struggles, academic struggles. They typically perform below grade level, generally in their in multiple areas of the curriculum. You know, like we talked about, they may have greater academic deficits related to other disabilities, right? Oftentimes we'll see these disabilities come together and kind of create what's happening. The academic difficulties, though, over time of students with emotional disability don't really appear to improve over time, right? We have to focus on that emotional disability, and then once we get the behavior, then the academics will come, right? A student who is not behaving is not ready for instruction, is not ready to learn, so they're not going to. So we have to work and focus on that before we can get any of the academic piece done. They often may feel peer rejection. They may not have a big peer group. They may be kind of that isolated person. You'll see some poor student-teacher interactions and really that lack of empathy or understanding. It's really scary sometimes with some of these students, what may happen. So those are things to look out for. If you have students, like, do they have a peer group? What kinds of friends do they have? Are they interacting? So really our objectives are really trying to control the misbehavior, right? We're going to manage that energy is what I like to say. We make it sound a little more sophisticated. We'll manage that energy. And again, it's not, you can't control somebody's behavior. It's how you and everybody else reacts and handles the situation. We're going to teach those academic and those social skills. Just like we talked about, you guys going to college, you have those pro-social skills. But a lot of these students don't have those. So they need to actually explicitly, like you did last week, you practice with that direct instruction, but explicitly be taught those social skills. How do I act in a group? How do I interact with the teacher? How do I handle when I'm mad? How do I make friends? Those type of things. And really, it's that balance between that behavior and that academic and social learning. That's why there's so important to have those integrated services, right? It's not just your general ed teacher, your special ed teacher. You'll have your school counselor. If your school or district has mental health workers or providers, they'll be involved. It's getting everybody involved in all those integrated services to help this individual. So there are some considerations, other things to think about. So you hear a lot about zero tolerance, right? There are some behaviors that school districts just won't tolerate despite whatever the disability is. When that happens and students get to a certain point of suspensions with students with disabilities, we hold what's called a manifestation determination. So we look at that act and the IEP team looks and meets and tries to determine, was this because of their disability? Or did they do this despite their disability? And when you have a student with an emotional disability, that is really hard to tease out. It's really hard to determine unless you have evidence that something was, I mean, for lack of better words, pre-planned, right? Then you have, if there was a thoughtful process to it, that's not necessarily because of emotional disability. That took some planning and thinking about it. We often in schools will do what's called functional behavioral assessments, or FBAs. You'll hear that term. And that's really looking at what's happening before the behavior, what's happened during the behavior, and what's happening after. So teams can kind of come up with a plan. Once you do that, then you'll come up with a behavior plan or a BIP. We'll look at, I'm sure you've heard PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention and Support. Those are usually school-wide systems. And then we do have what are called interim alternative educational settings. So if there's a significant issue, let's say a weapon or drugs, or if somebody really hurts somebody, a school district can, for 45 days, put a student out or place them in another placement without any meeting. Just depends. Students with disabilities can also be expelled from school. However, there's always a caveat. You can only be expelled. A student with a disability really can only be expelled if they do what I call one of the big three. So that is going to be a weapon. So we have somebody who brought obviously a gun or a knife or something to school. Another thing would be drugs. So if the student was caught with drugs or doing drugs in school, that's an expellable offense. The final thing is what's called, and this is left for interpretation, but seriously bodily injury, which honestly, by the definition, is that this student really sent somebody to a hospital. It's not if we get in a fist fight, it's like we really hurt somebody and we had to get emergency medical care and things like that. Then the students can be expelled. So you can expel a student with a disability. However, even if that student is expelled, the school district still has to provide that student services. So unless they enroll in another school district where they're given help, we still have an obligation to provide services to a student with a disability who has been expelled. I've had this happen multiple times. So schools and principals are realizing that, well, maybe expulsion is not really the thing because we're still responsible. The only difference is now they're not coming into your building. And expulsions are only good for 1 year. So you can't say, Mr. Hurley, you brought drugs to school. You can never come back to Anderson 4. No, Mr. Hurley could come back to Anderson for the next school year. So it's only for 1 school year. There's usually a hearing and all sorts of stuff. So one of the things and techniques you can do is behavior-specific praise. So what this is it's a positive statement directed towards the student or group of students that describes that specific behavior you want to see, right? You're praising them specifically. Wow, Sophia, I really liked the way you raised your hand today, right? Behavior specific. What is the behavior you would like them to do? Lindsay, I really liked the way you cooperatively worked with your group today, right? If you're doing some student teaching or things like that, you've heard about academic feedback and feedback like that. Well, we do the same thing with behavior, right? We want to give that praise specifically on what we want to see the student do, right? And that's to increase that positive behavior and hopefully decrease that problem behavior. It will hopefully put them back on task and in compliance. And again, it doesn't just have to be students who have ED. This could be just for students in your classroom in general who are experiencing some behavior problems. And it should be delivered more frequently, right? So I forget what they say, but for every negative statement you give a student, it's like, what, 8 to 10 positive statements, something like that, to erase that negative. So you want to make sure if this is happening that you are constantly doing that praise for the specific behavior, because you want to try and have the student realize that it's better. Sometimes they're doing the behavior for attention and they're going to seek attention, whether it's negative or positive, but you want to try and turn it around and have them seek positive attention. Oh, it's 6 praise statements for every 15 minutes. Seems like a lot, doesn't it? So every 15,
It seems like a lot.
it does.
But the more you do it, the more it just becomes natural.
Yep.
I mean, that's the best thing to do is just do it all the time, and it just becomes part of your instruction.
Yeah, now you don't have to sit there and count and be like, oh, I didn't give 6 statements every 15 minutes. But yeah, when you have students like this, and even in general, as just general instruction, this is good to do across the board because you can prevent behaviors by doing this. So you're going to establish those behavioral expectations in your room. You want to create that safe and respectful classroom. During instructional time, don't be sitting at a desk or doing something else. Walk around, look for what the students are doing, be involved with them. And then of course, praise them, right? The example here is, Joanna, thank you for cleaning up. Wait, the video's here in the way. Thank you for cleaning up immediately when I rang the service bell, right? The science bell, service bell. So, again, that specific behavior, you want to give it immediately following that desired behavior. Use that sincere tone of voice. Don't sound fake, no sarcasm, nothing like that. And then really do try and self-monitor as you can, and try and keep that 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 positives for 1 negative. So here's kind of what you do. Your expectation is students come to class prepared with all materials. So the behavior is all students at table 4 brought their science journals. And then example of that praise would be table 4. Thank you for remembering to bring your science journals to class today, right? That's a quick scan of what's happening. You can see it and you're giving that specific behavioral response. You remember to bring your journals. When someone else is talking, students raise a hand Milo raised his hand to ask a question. Again, Milo, great job following the class rule and raising your hand to ask a question. It seems lengthy and it might seem unnatural, but it really does make a difference. You need to remind the students all the time of what the behavior expectation is and then praise them for doing that. So here's what you're going to do in breakout rooms. So you're going to watch this video. And then in your rooms, you're going to come up with 2 specific praise statements that you can make. And then just one person in the chat with your group number is going to put the 2 best statements from your group. So we can put the link to the video in the chat so you have it. And then again, you're just going to come up with 2 praise statements, everybody, and then just share 2 in the chat from your group. So you'll have to nominate in your group one person to be the typist for tonight. I think, oops. Mr. Hurley, are you going to copy? Did you copy that link? Do you need me to?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay. I only asked Mr. Hurley to do this job because he is much quicker at this than I am. That's all. We could be here all night if I did it, and we don't want that.
There you go. There's the link, and also with the little quick overview of the instructions.
It won't take very long.
Um, I don't think the invitation for the breakout room worked for me. I like clicked on it when I got the video. Oh wait, never mind.
Same with me.
Wait, I found it.
Wait, I don't know if where to see to join the breakout room because I also clicked on it when I was pressing the video.
No problem, no problem. I'll move you to a new room, okay?
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
If I remember, the video is just a few minutes, so we'll give them a few minutes here and then
Okay.
or watch it and then I'd say we'll bring them back at I don't know, 6:50, like 10 minutes, if not even that quite.
Yeah.
Out of our two on the thing. So that's why I said, Jack, I love the way you're sharing with your friends. And then I said, Riley, thank you for picking up the trash in your area.
I had a mini lesson that I had to give today. And in
Uh-huh.
order for me to keep the students on track, I had to say stuff like this
Uh-huh.
because it would get to the point to where they would get
They're definitely starting to have some conversation about it now. We can probably start bringing it back. I think we can bring them back. All right, so as you come back, one person in your group give us 2 phrases that you guys came up with, and then just put your group number in the chat. I forget how many rooms we have 8 rooms, I think. Thank you for walking down the hall quietly. Thank you for having great listening skills. Yeah. Thank you for putting your phone away once class started. Yeah, good job counting to 20. I like that. I love the way you're sharing with your friends. Very behavior specific, right? That praise. That's a big one. Walking in the hallway. That's huge too. Thank you, everybody, for following the directions tonight. So you guys seem to understand the behavior specific praise. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it does take some getting used to. Absolutely. But you want to be specific, just like we are with academic praise, about the praise that you're giving the students. So one of the other things, and we'll go through this briefly in the essence of time, is, you know, everybody at the beginning of the year, whether you're elementary, middle, or high, you'll set up your classroom rules or your expectations for your classrooms, right? So, you know, you want to make sure when you're doing that, just a few things to keep in mind. One, that they're age appropriate, right? That we have rules that are appropriate. So if you look at this, like an example would be responsible. Well, what is that going to look like? What does responsibility look like? What does responsible look like? So you have to have an action or behavior. If you say be responsible, a lot of students don't understand what that means. So a toddler, it might be put your toys away. For a preschool student, maybe clean your center. Elementary, keep your work area neat. The other important thing, and we talked about this, is that culturally responsive, right? So make sure you know about the cultures in your classroom and the backgrounds of your students, because you want to make sure that you set classroom rules that are culturally responsible and acceptable for students. So an example would be, you know, some teachers define that behavior as be respectful, and what respectful looks like is look at me when I'm talking. But in some cultures, looking at me is not okay. So the classroom rule clashes with that student's cultural norm. So you can then create a different rule, like use your listening ears, those types of things. Another example is, you know, often we'll see things take turns talking. However, again, in some cultures, there's a lot of talking over each other and there's a lot of interrupting each other. So again, that's an example of where your rule may impact and you may have to change, and not to condemn or you know, disrespect any of your children's cultures in your classroom. So really just some basic rules. Make sure they're positively stated, right? Don't run. Use your walking feet is much nicer than don't run. Try not to create any more than 5 rules. You know, you don't want to list of 15 or 20 rules. That's just crazy. Because the students do have to learn them in multiple settings, right? In the classroom, in the playground, in PE, in art, all of those things. So they're learning them all throughout their school building. Keep them simple and specific. Don't get too wordy. For example, put your toys away is much more appropriate for younger children than clean up after yourself, right? Again, these are things, as you're doing these rules and you're creating them, you'll have to model and show the children, what does that look like? How do I show that I'm doing that? And then make sure they're measurable and observable, right? Sit on the swing is much easier observed than be safe, right? How do you, is be safe again is very vague. So it's being specific about what that behavior is you expect. So we're not going to break out into the rooms, but if you look at this, right? So here's this example. We've got 3: follow directions, use quiet voices, and use walking feet. Okay, well, there's 3 rules, but what's wrong with those, do you think? Somebody can just unmute and tell us.
They aren't specific enough.
Yeah, Riley, that's right. They're not specific. Follow directions. What does that mean? Use quiet voices, right? And then you look at the other one and you have do what the teacher tells you to do. No yelling, no running, be nice to your friends, right? What's someone see the issue with these ones?
There's too many rules.
Yeah, there's too many rules, right? Absolutely. What else?
They're not all like positively stated.
That's right, Sophia. They're not all positively stated, right? No yelling, no running. Be nice to your friend. Well, what does that look like, right? Use kind hands, all those type things. So yeah, these are not really good examples, but you can see when you start to create classroom rules, think about these things. And on the module under resources, I think I put the IRIS link. There are some great things for behavior, some great ideas, some great strategies. So, use that as you continue on. Any questions about behavior? It's everywhere. All right, let's talk a little bit about the midterm here. So it'll be available as of 7:15 tonight, and you have till Thursday at 5 o'clock to complete it. Okay, there is no time limit like we talked about, but it shouldn't really take you more than an hour and a half to do. I think there's like 38 questions, some short answer and some multiple choice. It's really not, it shouldn't take you long to do. Y'all be careful and make sure you're reading each question carefully. That did set a few of you on the quiz back because you kind of read it and interpreted it a little bit differently than what the question is asking. So make sure you read it carefully. You do not have a time limit, but you have to do it in one setting. So once you start it, you have to finish it that day, but there's no time limit. So if you need more than an hour and a half, do that, but it shouldn't take you more than an hour and a half. Review all of the synchronous, the asynchronous, which you have for, that's due next week. Just quickly review it over, look it over before you take the midterm. But again, you'll have access to it. So you should be able to answer the questions in any readings, right? So the midterm really is focusing on some of those legal aspects of special ed we talked about, some of that multicultural education, parents and families and communication, and then some of these different disabilities where you have your SLD, ED, ADHD, and ID. So those are all the ones that we've kind of gone over up to this point, with the ADHD being the one you do on your own. Do you guys have any questions? It is not locked from the browser. You can use your browser and notes and things like that. But you only have till Thursday at 5. So unless something happens to you and you email Mr. Hurley or I, you have to get it done Thursday by 5. Nothing late will be accepted, pending any major incident in your life. Okay. So here's your last activity. Write one behavior-specific praise statement that you could give to anybody in your life for behavior that you want that individual to repeat. So any behavior specific that you would like repeated to anybody in your life. It could be a boyfriend, it could be a girlfriend, it could be a partner, whatever, but some sort of behavior. Like for me, I would say, thank you, Gary, for opening the car door for me. I really appreciated that. So I really want him to keep opening the car door. So I would praise him for that. Mr. Hurley, how about you? What's one you'd give your wife?
Thank you. I would say, thank you for taking the time to take the dogs out when I'm not available.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of
chores.
things.
And like, thank you for cleaning the kitchen. Thank you for cleaning the dishes tonight. That's a behavior you
Yeah.
want repeated. Thank you, Griffin, for refilling my water
My
cup.
water.
Yeah. So now with all of these people, you can start using these phrases and they'll look at you like, what is going on? But remember, if you want them to repeat it, encourage it with those, thank you for opening my car door. That's right. That is a long lost behavior out there. Absolutely. Thank you for paying for dinner tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you for letting me watch the Packers game. See, there you go. You guys can have a little bit of fun with this. So I am going to stop sharing at this point. Thank you for emptying the dishwasher. Yeah. Thank you for folding the laundry. That's always a big one. I hate laundry. Although I tell you, I don't mind washing it. It's the folding and the putting away I get stuck on. They'll sit in my dryer for like a couple days before I'm like, ooh, gotta take those out. Or thank you for scooping the cat litter. Really appreciate that. All right, do you guys, before we end, we're gonna end a few minutes early. Do you have any questions about anything? Next week we're off. Yay! Fall break for you guys. Woohoo! Any questions on the project that's coming up due at the end of the month? Any questions on anything we've gone over? I did update the syllabus and uploaded and put that in Canvas last week from this kind of change that we had. No questions? You ready to roll? All right, your midterm will open up in about 10, 11 minutes. Again, you don't have to do it tonight. You can go relax if you want tonight and not worry about it till tomorrow. You just have to have it done by Thursday. So if not, y'all are ready, free to go, and we will see you on the 23rd, I think.
I just want to
23rd.
say, oh, sorry. I just want to say sorry for being late to the